This message comes from NPR sponsor Hulu. The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox, inspired by the infamous story you only thought you knew. Watch the Hulu original series, The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox, now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
What is one of the most interesting statistics that you've seen lately?
The top 25 podcasts reach half of all weekly podcast consumers.
Having hosted a show that lots of people listen to and also hosted a show that no one listens to. I actually know what it feels like to be on both sides of that coin. Well, a statistic I recently learned is that more Americans think of extramarital affairs as morally wrong than the death penalty.
Do they feel that you should be punished by an extramarital affair?
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. This week, we're connecting the dots between sausage making, thermostats, and immigration. I know. How are all of these things connected? Well, we're going to find out with Jasmine Gars, NPR senior immigration correspondent, and Christian Paz, political correspondent at Vox.
I'm so glad to be back. Hi.
Yeah, this is so exciting. Thanks for having us.
Okay, so we're here to talk about some recent polling that I found quite shocking. Can you, in a nutshell, tell our listeners about what Gallup says about American views on immigration?
Yeah, what Gallup captures is something that is pretty remarkable, actually, like as jarring of a shift as you can see on a chart, which is essentially that the trend that we've been seeing over the last 5 years or so of increasing opposition to, immigration in general has slowed down. It's shifted almost entirely, where fewer Americans want to decrease immigration. Maybe Americans are saying they're good with the level of immigration that they're seeing now, or even some Americans saying, actually, we should be increasing the rate of immigration now, which is kind of the opposite of what the trend was.
Is pretty surprising. To be specific, according to Gallup, the share of Americans who want lower rates of immigration has dropped from 55% in 2024 to 30% this year. 79% of Americans now say immigration is a good thing for the country, which is a record high. I don't remember ever hearing that many people being in favor of immigration in my lifetime. And it's not just this poll showing a shift in how we think about immigration. A Quinnipiac college poll found that 64% of voters now favor pathways towards legal status for undocumented immigrants, as opposed to deporting most of them, up from 55% just 6 months ago. And according to Pew, specific actions like workplace ICE raids and ending temporary protected status for many have either mixed or negative reactions among Americans. But why has this change happened, and where might we see reverberations of this in our culture?
Well, I think in order to really talk about this, we have to talk about what's been happening for the last 2 years. I mean, yes, we had a very large number of immigrants who came into the U.S. and across the border, right? But there was like a very concerted campaign to send people, like to bus people to blue cities.
And this was done by Republican governors of Florida and Texas, for instance.
Right? I remember 2 years ago, covering like buses and buses of asylum seekers and migrants arriving into New York. And it was like the artificial creation of a very chaotic scene. Now, compare that to, I've been traveling through the Midwest, going to towns where there are severe population declines and labor shortages, right? And so I was having this dual experience of being on the border, speaking to like this Brazilian asylum seeker I spoke to that worked in solar panel installation. I spoke to a woman at a refugee center in New York who was a trilingual OBGYN. I was speaking to people who were qualified, and I kept thinking, what if this had been a concerted, organized effort to address American labor needs instead of the creation of these scenes of chaos? And so that created this tremendous tremendous dip in support for immigration. I think what we're seeing now is the result of all that. We're getting these scenes of masked agents dragging people out of their cars.
I want to hear from you also on this, Christian. Like, talk to me about why Americans were so sour on immigration last year. Like, what contributed to that going into the 2024 elections?
Yeah, I was really curious about this, when looking at what political science and what, the theory on public opinion can tell us about this, because one thing with immigration is that public opinion is so idiosyncratic. Like, it can seem very, very contradictory at times. And, with people wanting both like very pro-immigrant proposals or pro-dreamer stances, and at the same time endorsing things like mass deportations. There's another like economic case also, which is that in general, looking at the Gallup data, talking to some of these pollsters, what emerged is a greater openness to immigration during times when economic sentiment tends to be better, and more of a closedness to immigration and a turn against immigration when economic sentiment or economic indicators are perceived to be negative. We were living through a historic period of inflation starting in 2021. It does make sense then that as people viewed their economic situation a lot more precariously and more critically, seeing this in the news as such a vivid marker of there being more competition in the economy, that people would start to turn away from that openness.
I'm just remembering this conversation I had with someone in their 60s at some point who, he was having like really serious health issues, and he was going through the health system, and he was like, it's unbelievable. I'm so stressed out.
Yeah.
And this is because, we have all these immigrants clogging up the health system. And it was just really interesting to me, like there is a very serious issue with our healthcare system, but it's almost like immigrants, and I don't know what Christian would think of this, but immigrants were like the quickest thing that you could grab onto and say it was this. This is the reason things are bad.
Oh, yeah. It happened all the time when talking to Trump-curious voters, specifically who might have been Democratic voters or classified as Democratic voters in the past, where that was like the go-to explanation that Biden and the Democrats are letting in people and allowing people to use our social safety nets. It came up quite a bit, yeah.
It's so interesting. But I want to talk about what's in this recent Gallup poll. It seems to show views on immigration totally flip-flopping to being much more positive towards immigration compared to just last year. What do you think is causing this shift? Is it contrarianism or is it something deeper?
There's definitely an element here that is explained by political science, what some political scientists call thermostatic public opinion, or like the American voter tends to, like you would play with a thermostat in an apartment, turn your air conditioning up when you feel like the room is getting too warm, turn it down when you feel like the room is getting too cold. That the public responds like that to the signals that political leaders, that politicians, that those in power send out. So when, the party in power are the Democrats, when pro-immigrant policies are being implemented, that the public reacts in the opposite direction to that. And the flip happens when a Republican comes in, when anti-immigrant proposals start to become policy, when the public starts to see things play out, that the public will just naturally respond in that way. It's been applied to various other issues, not just on immigration. The other really big one is like healthcare reform and like the Affordable Care Act and how it was popular before. And then once the sausage making got displayed, the public began to turn against it. The other thing we were talking about earlier that Jasmine was saying was the images that you see, like the effect of media coverage is pretty significant too.
Jasmine, in a conversation that you had previous with our producer, Liam, you mentioned that there are people who perhaps they found Trump's proposed immigration policies appealing, but now they realize that, people they know, have been deported, and they're kind of scratching their heads. You had this theory that perhaps, people more broadly might have been interested in Trump's proposals to get the quote unquote bad immigrants out, but maybe that's not how they're feeling about things now. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the promise made during campaign season contained a fallacy, right? The promise was we're going to get millions and millions of rapists and criminals out of the country. And if you want to talk about like statistics and numbers, there have been many criminological studies over the years that show that immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, do not commit crimes at the same level as American citizens.
Yeah.
It is a much lower rate. And so, but the thing is, when you promise that there are millions of horrifying monsters living among you, and I will take them out. First of all, if you tell me there's a horrible monster in my house, I might say, yes, please get this horrible monster out. I'm fully with this. But also, when you promise that, when you have a quota of like 1 million deportations in a year, you are going to have to start going after people's neighbors. People in immigration detention right now, somewhere around 70% don't have any criminal conviction. We're losing a lot of the workforce.
Yeah.
The foreign-born population of the U.S. has declined by nearly 1.5 million people. In agriculture, it's very pronounced, and we've lost 155,000 agricultural workers in the last 4 months. Something that's been really interesting to me is to speak to people who voted for this president, but who work in agriculture, for example, and who are like, well, I think this might have gone a little too far now.
Coming up, the potential consequences of this flip-flop on immigration.
The administration has taken a really big bet that they'll be rewarded for pursuing the most maximal approach. And what we're seeing right now are signs that that may not have been a good bet to make.
Stick around.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Made in Cookware. President and co-founder Jake Kalick shares the key ingredients that go into Made in products.
We try to design products that are going to last you an incredibly long time. And to know that we're making this in places that take the raw materials seriously, take the manufacturing processes seriously, that's ultimately what's going to allow us to sleep better at night selling this product to you.
Learn more about Made in Cookware at MADEIN This message comes from Cook Unity. Fuel your day with fresh, fully cooked meals from award-winning chefs. Every dish is crafted with hand-picked ingredients and delivered to your door. Commitment-free subscriptions start as low as $11 a meal. Skip, pause, or cancel anytime. Go to cookunity.com/meals or enter code MEALS before checkout for free premium meals for life. cookunity.com/meals or enter code MEALS before checkout. Terms and conditions apply.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Hulu, The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox. In 2007, Amanda Knox was halfway around the world, studying abroad in Italy. She had no idea that her dream would turn into a nightmare. Inspired by the actual events of her wrongful conviction and 15-year fight for freedom, watch the Hulu original series, The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox, now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
Okay, so we've talked about the people who were like, I wanted less immigration, but all these mass deportations have gone too far. But I also wonder about those who are seeing what's going on and are just kind of satisfied now. Like, by certain metrics, perhaps Trump has accomplished what he set out to accomplish. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that is pretty dramatic, but just there being such a plummet in numbers of border crossings, there being like a complete shutdown of asylum programs, meaning that goals that the Trump administration set out to accomplish have been accomplished, and that, there aren't record border crossings every month or something like that, like used to be coming out during the Biden presidency. Essentially, among voters and Americans who cared about immigration as like their top priority, the fact that it's being resolved means that it's no longer their top priority, and so they're more focused on the economy.
What are the potential cultural or political ramifications of this shift in how Americans view immigration?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I was just looking at like the latest Pew approval ratings poll on Trump. And despite all of this, right, and opposition to specific policies and this overall shift that Gallup was capturing, there is still like some underlying support for Trump. Like, I think it found that among all Americans, something like 46%, so slightly less than half, say that they express confidence in how Trump will make decisions about immigration, which 46% suggests that nearly half the country is still trusting him. Trump has already changed the way that the country views, immigrants, almost like changed the baseline. Like there was a time when, polling on building a wall along the border with Mexico was, really, really negative on the subject. And now it's much more accepted as like an acceptable policy position now when compared to like 8 years ago. And there's still like large shares of the country that are okay with, what the Trump administration is doing.
True.
One other thing to remember is like the Republican side just barely won the popular vote, but the administration has been behaving and acting as if they had a gigantic mandate to pursue the most maximal version of the policies that they want. And what that means is putting their coalition under a lot of tension. The new voters that came out or were persuaded to flip for Republicans last time around, the ones who aren't necessarily strong MAGA supporters, who are now maybe unsure or dissatisfied with what the administration has accomplished. It all suggests that the administration is taking a really big bet that they'll be rewarded for pursuing the most maximal approach. And what we're seeing right now are signs that may not have been a good bet to make, because a lot of those folks are upset and dissatisfied and maybe aren't switching to the Democrats, but are disengaging from politics entirely. And I think that is something that we may see more signs of as we head toward midterm elections.
Jasmine, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. How do you think this could potentially change American culture?
Well, I mean, I think, like Christian said, it already has. I think it could go either way. I think what this poll indicates could continue, and people could continue to get fed up. But there's also a fed up complacency that could happen. The other day I live in Queens, New York. I was with my family. Once in a while, we like to go to this Argentine restaurant where you get a lot of people. You got like Colombians, Ecuadorians. People just go and eat a cow. And, we're sitting there with my family, like waiting for our dinner to arrive. And I suddenly tune into the radio. And the radio is this DHS ad. And it's Kristi Noem listing the nationalities of rapists and murderers and serial killers. And it's all the nationalities of people who are eating with us. And like the cooks, the kitchen is out in the open in that restaurant we go to, and the cooks are there, and everyone's just eating their dinner, and the cooks are cooking and grilling, and the servers are serving. And I looked around me and I was like, is anyone else hearing this? It had become the background noise. That was a moment where I felt like, is this going to become something that we just kind of sort of try and tune out until it hits us? Until our dinner arrives.
Christian, Jasmine, thank you both so much. I've learned so much in this conversation. I really appreciate it.
I did too. Thank you so much.
Me too.
That was Jasmine Gars, NPR senior immigration correspondent, and Christian Paz, political correspondent at Fox. And you all know I love hearing from you. And I just want to shout out one comment I read this week on our episode about why cringe culture is hindering us. Spotify user Megan wrote, quote, "If earnestness and vulnerability in art is cringe, then the opposite of that is heavily polished corporate art that appeals to as many customers as possible. And is that really what we want in our culture?" Megan, Megan, you came with the heat with this comment. I agree with you 100%. To be vulnerable is to be human. And to everybody else, I love hearing what y'all connect with in the episode. So wherever you're listening, drop a comment or review, and you might just hear me shout you out right here on the show. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Liam McBain.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Charles Schwab. When it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices, like full-service wealth management and advice when you need it. You can also invest on your own and trade on Thinkorswim. Visit schwab.com to learn more. This message comes from Jerry. Many people are overpaying on car insurance. Why? Switching providers can be a pain. Jerry helps make the process painless. Jerry is the only app that compares rates from over 50 insurers in minutes and helps you switch fast with no spam calls or hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Before you renew your car insurance policy, download the Jerry app or head to jerry.ai/NPR. This message comes from Warby Parker. What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost, like free adjustments for life. Find your pair at warbyparker.com or visit one of their hundreds of stores around the country.